Hello, everyone, and welcome to this interview Zoom chat thingamajig. My name is Brandon, and I'm sitting here with Ty Garvey. He's the bass player of Jonzetta, or I guess former bass player of Jonzetta,
Yeah, sure.
former band Jonzetta, however you want to explain it.
Yeah. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool. I was just telling Ty about how some of like my friends and all, when I mentioned that I was going to be talking to someone from Jonzetta, they got super excited, and he was kind of talking about how it's cool seeing like you still have that fan base after these years and all. So
Yeah. It's very cool and very surprising. But but every yeah, totally cool though.
yeah, and I guess with y'all too, I don't know, because some people see it like as a good or bad thing, but I know as a fan, it's cool stuff like Spotify or whatever. Because I remember when it got to the point where I had to track down y'all's albums like in thrift stores or whatever. And even today, I saw one and I told my wife, I was like, I got to pick up like this one. But I feel like that's what's cool is people nowadays can go and find like y'all's band super easy and get to listen to all of y'all's catalog.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's really cool. Um there's part of me that hopes that it'll get discovered somehow and then just become huge or something. Like that happens
Hmm.
uh well, what was that? So that band Refused. Are you familiar with the band Refused?
I think so.
Yeah, they were like this in the mid to late '90s. They were this hardcore punk band. They were from
Hmm.
Sweden and were relatively obscure. Um, they their last show ever was uh, in this basement of this house somewhere in the United States uh, for like probably 100 people. Um, and they just broke up after the show. And it was like right after they had released this album called The Shape of Punk to Come.
Hmm.
'98, the album came out. And so like they released the album, it wasn't doing anything. They came to the US to play some shows. Like no one was coming to the shows. And they were just like, why are we even doing this? And so they broke up.
Hmm.
And then that album became like one of the most influential albums in the like punk and hardcore genre. Like it was like kind of prophetically called The Shape of Punk to Come because
Hmm.
so many bands after that ripped off that album and like tried to sound like Refused.
Hmm.
And so they like kind of broke up in obscurity, and then as years went on they amassed this like huge cult following. And so then they got back together, and I don't know, in the early 2010s, maybe like 2014 or something.
Hmm.
And so their last show was in some basement for like less than 100 people, and their next show after their reformation was like headlining a night at Coachella or something like that, like tens of thousands of people. And so like there's part of me that always kind of like, I'm like, man, it'd be cool if like something like that happened with us, but I don't think it will. But it'd be fun.
We'll see. 2020 has been a very weird year, so I think that right
Yeah,
now you have a good chance of that happening.
sure.
So, I guess a little background for people who may be not familiar with the band. How did you first get into music yourself? And then how did y'all get together to form the band Jonzetta?
Sure. Me personally, I was always kind of obsessed with music, like from for as long as I can remember. Like music was like one thing that like I just like really connected with on a really deep level. Um, and I think my parents kind of recognized that in me. And when I was 8, my dad bought me a guitar and signed me up for guitar lessons. And that lasted about a month, maybe, because I think it was one of those things where like my dad was kind of like, he's like, if you're gonna take these lessons and play guitar, he's like, you got to practice. And I'm like, but I'm 8 and all of my friends are outside running around in circles in the yard, and I want to go do that. Like, I don't want to sit in my room and practice guitar. And so I kind of quit playing guitar, but still was like deeply obsessed with like music and just listening to music. And I was constantly listening to music and stuff like that. And everywhere I went, I carried this little like boom box with me, and would just like, set it down whenever I got where I was going, and I would tune it to a radio station, or I would put like a CD in it or something, and just be listening to music all the time. And so then finally, when I was in like 8th grade, when I was like 14, a friend of mine had got a guitar, and he was taking guitar lessons, and he taught me how to play this song called Santa Monica by this band called Everclear. On guitar, and then he also taught me how to play Brain Stew by Green Day, and I just became obsessed with playing guitar. That following Christmas, my mom got me a guitar for Christmas, and I and that became all I did after that. I probably less than a year after I started playing guitar, I formed my first band. It was a ska band. We were called We're Not Ugly, and we were pretty bad, but we were all like 15 and 16, so how good can you be? And then that band lasted for a majority of my high school career, and then toward the end of really at our high school, there was 2 bands. There was my ska band, We're Not Ugly, and then there was this rock band called Median that Robert and Kyle from Jonzetta were in. They were in Median. And so our 2 bands shared a bass player, and because I played guitar and We're Not Ugly, Robert played drums in Median, and then Kyle played guitar. And so we shared a bass player, and we would play shows together a lot. And so we were all really good friends with each other. And then my senior year of high school, which would have been when Robert was in 11th grade and Kyle was in 10th grade, another band, Robert started another band with some dudes where Robert was playing drums, and they needed a lead guitarist. And so Robert asked me if I wanted to play guitar in this band. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so that band was called Citizen Youth. And it was just kind of it was just like a rock band. Like, it was a lot of fun. But I kind of struggled with our music some. It was a little too like man rocky for me, I guess you would say, like just like a little too like radio rock type stuff, and I just wasn't into that. I was really into bands like Me Without You, like Your Shirt, bands like 238, and a lot of these Tooth and Nail bands. But yeah, so I was in that band with Robert, and while we were in that band, Robert and I became really close. And then probably about 9 or 10 months later, I get this phone call one day from Robert, and we're still in Citizen Youth at this point. But I get this phone call from Robert, and he goes, "Hey, I've got this idea." And I was like, "What's up?" And he goes, "I want to start a band. I want to like learn a couple of covers, maybe write a couple of songs. And I want us to book a show at Gravity." Gravity was this local coffee house in Clinton, Mississippi, where we grew up that had shows and stuff. So he's like, "Yeah, I want to start a band. I want to write a couple songs, maybe learn a couple covers. I want to book a show at Gravity. I want to play the show, and I want to break up on stage." And I was like, "Dude, that sounds awesome and hilarious." And he was like, "Yeah, and the real funny part is I'm going to play guitar and sing." I was like, "That is really funny," because he was a drummer. He was a good drummer. And I was like, "Man, that is really funny." And he's like, yeah, it's gonna be me and Kyle's in, and my friend Doug is gonna be playing drums, and we just need a bass player. So he's like, I'm wondering if you're in. I was like, I mean, I've played bass before, on occasion, you know. And I was like, yeah, sure, like I'm in. Let's do it. And so we got together at Robert's house, and we did that. We wrote one or two songs. I remember two songs, and then I remember us learning two covers. And then we got on some show that was going at Gravity, and we played it, and we broke up on stage, and that was the first Jonzetta show. And at that moment, we didn't plan on there being another Jonzetta show. That was just it. Like, it was just this thing, you know, this one-time thing. And but I guess some people really liked us. Mm-hmm. And then, like, probably 3 or 4 months later, someone was like, hey, do you guys want to play again? And so we're like, yeah, we'll get back together. We'll reform and we'll play again. And so we did it again. Went through the whole rigmarole, broke up on stage again. Yeah. And then it was at that show that I realized that I was like, man, this is a lot of fun. Like, you know, I was in my other band, Citizen Youth, with Robert, and that was my like serious band. And then Jonzetta was my fake band. Mm-hmm. But I was like, man, my fake band is like 1,000 times more fun than my serious band is. And so I think it was like maybe like a day or two later, I quit my fake band. I mean, I quit my serious band. Mm-hmm. Because I just realized, I was like, I'm not having fun. Like, this isn't fun to me, and music should be fun. And so I quit that band. Mm-hmm. And then not long after that, Robert quit that band, or that band broke up. That band just kind of broke up after that. Yeah. And then just, you know, every couple months, someone would ask us to play a show, and we would get together and we'd play a show. And that's what it was. Like, mm-hmm. We never practiced. We never considered ourselves to be a real band. Like, we never got together to write songs. Mm-hmm. Like, we would play a show, and then we would completely go inactive until someone asked us to play a show again.
So what I'm learning is the key is I just need to send an email saying, hey, here's $1,000.
Yeah.
So I was reading online, and it was saying that that there was a point where y'all were kind of wondering if y'all should stay together or what the next step is, and that's when y'all were approached by Tooth and Nail. Like, is that kind of how it was? And how did it feel when you had Tooth and Nail come and offer you a contract?
Yeah, so there's a little more to that story. So basically what happened was, so our first show was we formed, and our first show ever, the one that we broke up at, was in September of 2002. It was me, Robert, Kyle, and this guy named Doug who played drums. I love Doug. He was a great dude. I know nothing about Doug other than his name was Doug. I don't know his last name. I never knew his last name. And I knew his name was Doug, and I knew that he played drums in our band, and I knew that he wasn't really a drummer. And that's all I knew about Doug. And so so that was September of 2002. In June of 2003, we got asked to play a show down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Robert and Kyle are still in high school at this point. I think Robert had just graduated from high school. I had just finished my freshman year of college. But we got asked to play the show down the Mississippi Gulf Coast. and we knew Doug's parents weren't going to let him go to the show because it's about 3 hours from where we grew up, and so we just asked our friend Nick, who was a good friend of mine, who was a good drummer. We just asked Nick to fill in this show for us down on the Gulf Coast, and we just didn't even tell Doug about it. And so I feel bad because we kind of kicked Doug out of the band, and we never even told him. Like, I haven't talked to Doug again since this day. I haven't seen him since the last time he played a show with us. But yeah, it was at that show in June of 2003. That show was with a band, another Jackson band called Fletcher, who eventually changed their name to Color Revolt. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you ever heard of them, but they had a fair amount of success. They were an unbelievable band. Mm-hmm. And then it was also this band from Louisiana called As Cities Burn, mm-hmm. who were, have you heard of ACB?
Yeah.
Okay. So they were nobodies at the time. And they were the kind of band, like they were the opposite of us in the sense of like, we never practiced, mm-hmm. never considered ourselves a real band. Like we never really worked hard. They were like the hardest working dudes you knew. And like, they were like, you know, independently touring across the country, like on their own, completely on their own DIY, and like trying really hard to make it happen for themselves. And so we met them that night, and we became really good friends with them. And our friendship with them just kind of grew. And so every time they would come to Jackson or the Jackson, Mississippi area, we would play shows with them. Mm-hmm. So eventually, later in 2003, probably October of 2003, we got another drummer, a guy named Mick Parsons, who was playing drums in another band that Robert was in at the time. It was the same sort of thing. Like, well, that time it was me and Robert and Kyle. This is October of 2003. Me and Robert, we hadn't played a show since June. Mm-hmm. Hadn't even talked about the band since June. Me and Robert and Kyle are sitting at a pizza place in Jackson that also used to have shows. We went there to see some band that night. It was like a Monday night, and we were eating pizza before the show, and we were reading through this publication called the Jackson Free Press, and we were just reading through it to see what shows were coming up that weekend. And we see that on Saturday night we're playing. And so we're like looking around the table. We're like, who booked this show? And it had to have been one of the three of us, mm-hmm. because we didn't really have a drummer. Like, it was just Robert, Kyle, and myself.
It's just Doug, just trying to be a cool dude.
Yeah, to get back in the game. And so we're like, who booked this show? And everyone's like, I didn't book it. And so we're like, oh, well, we'll just call and cancel then, because we don't have a drummer, and we haven't even thought about playing together in 3 or 4 months. Like, so we'll just call and cancel it. So that was Monday night. Then on Tuesday night, I get a call from Robert, and he's like, I think I want to play the show. And I was like, all right, we don't have a drummer. And he's like, well, I'll get Mick to play drums. And like I said, Mick was playing drums in another mm-hmm. band I was in at the time. He's like, I'll get Mick to play drums. And so I was like, all right, well, if you want to do it, let's do it. And so we got together the night before the show. We wrote 4 songs that night, one of which ended up being on Popularity. And we played the show, and it went well. We didn't break up on stage. We just played like a normal band would. It went well. It was a lot of fun. And so we just kind of started playing a little more regularly, mm-hmm. kind of started practicing some here and there. And and then um and then throughout that time we developed a friendship with As Cities Burn.
Mm-hmm.
um and then probably almost a year goes by, 11 months or something like that goes by. As Cities Burn ends up signing a record deal with Tooth and Nail, Solid State. And they asked us to play. So this is following October of 04. They asked us to play 2 shows with them, one in Monroe, Louisiana, and one the next night in Jackson. And we say yes because they're our friends. But we had, but at that point we were kind of trying to figure out what we were doing as a band, and we'd kind of gotten to the point where we were like, we either need to like really try and do this, like
Mm-hmm.
really start practicing and focusing on writing songs and getting better, or we need to just, move on with our lives and do whatever we're going to do. And we were leaning towards the latter. We were leaning towards just moving on with our lives and doing whatever we were going to do. And so we decided that Jackson show was going to be our last show. And so we billed it as that like last Jonzetta show, October 15th or whatever, 2004. And so the night before that show, we went and played that show in Louisiana with As Cities Burn. And they were newly signed to Tooth and Nail. They had this brand new van and trailer, and they had their manager there with them, this guy named Ryan Rado. And they forced him to watch our set. He didn't want to. He didn't care about us, but they were like, no, you have to go watch this band. And so they like drug him into the venue and made him watch us. And he loved us. So after the show, he came up to us. He's like, I loved you guys. I think you were awesome. I really want to help you out. Like, where's your MySpace? I need to see your promo pics. Give me some demos, all this jazz. And we're like, okay, well, we don't have a MySpace. We don't have promo pics. We're not a real band. We haven't made any demos. We're planning on breaking up tomorrow night. And so he was basically like, no, don't do that. Like I can help you guys out. And we're like, okay. So on the way home that night, we just kind of talked about it and we were like, I don't know, should we give this guy a shot? And so we decided like, yeah, we'll give it a shot. And so it ended up not being our last show the next night in Jackson. And so then Rado was like, all right, here's what you guys need to do. You need to take promo pics. You need to get a MySpace. You need to record some demos. So we're like, all right, we'll do all that. And then a couple months went by and we hadn't done any of it. And Ryan called us and he's like, where's all this stuff? And we were like, oh, it's nowhere. We haven't done it, We're like, I think you're like severely underestimating how not real of a band we are. Like, so he got mad and kind of yelled at us and then, told us to get it in gear. And then he set us up with a guy in Nashville to go record a demo with.
Mm-hmm.
And so over spring break of 05, so March of 05, we went to Nashville. We recorded a 4-song demo, which actually Tooth and Nail ended up releasing, just called 4 songs. So we recorded that. And then after we recorded that, Rado just started shopping it around to labels. And then labels started calling and, showing interest. And so then we were like, oh no, like this is like real. Like we could actually do this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that a couple months after that, at the end of that semester, we all decided to drop out of school and go for it. And we had, I think by that point we'd kind of decided that we were going to go with Tooth and Nail Records. They were like the label of our childhood. Like all of us grew up being like Tooth and Nail punk rock kids, you know? And, but two, like they were also the label that seemed genuinely the most interested in us and seemed to believe in us the most. And so, yeah, we kind of decided to drop out of school and sign a record deal with them and try and do it big, you know?
So one thing that I noticed growing up and listening to a lot of Tooth and Nail artists was that they had this like tightrope they were walking, where on one hand you wanted to produce music that was good. You didn't want this watered down stuff. You wanted stuff that you could look at and say, man, that's rocking, you know, or I'm singing this love song, you know, and it's a real love song, you know, about either something good, you know, going good, going bad. But you also had this other side where you had this, you know, Christian fan base where they just want to hear, you know, Christ or God or hope in a song. So it's like a song isn't good unless you say Christ in it. So, you know, for y'all being artists, and I don't know where y'all were with, you know, y'all's faith at this time, but did you have this struggle where you're sitting here saying like, man, I got this really good song, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have Jesus in it. But you know, how do you go about that when you're on a label that people, I guess, assume or label as Christian?
It's, man, I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. Because having been in a world where, like I was a Christian and am a Christian, very much so. All of us were, you know, all of us were practicing Christians, and we weren't ashamed of that in any way. But then it's also, we felt this pressure to portray that in our music. And it's not that we like didn't want to portray it. But it was more of just like it was a question of like, how do we do it and it not seem like forced or seemed, you know, because Robert wrote almost all of our lyrics, and Robert was and is today a Christian, but that's just not how he expresses himself. Like his faith is and again, I don't want to speak for Robert. But I get the sense that his faith is just kind of this internal thing for him. And so it was for him to write a song about the hope of Christ, while it's a hope that he may have, it would have felt something forced or like disingenuine to him. And so there was that. There was also just this idea of like, you know, people calling us a Christian band or like we're on a Christian label. And we had a lot of discussions about this with other bands on our label as well. But like, just like, what does that even mean? Like, it seems like it's the only job, because it was our job, that you know, throws this label like that on it. Like you know, like if some guy in the NFL playing football is a Christian, is he playing Christian football?
Yeah.
Like, no, he's just playing football. Like, and he's a Christian. And so that's kind of how we saw it. Like, we're just a band, and we are Christians.
Mm-hmm.
But so we struggled with that a lot. I've also struggled. This is in more recent years, but just on reflection,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of looking back at like the pressure that fans put on us
Mm-hmm.
to be this certain way, or to live up to this expectation that they have for you, and they don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's kind of crazy to place those expectations on someone. It's also wild to place expectations like that on a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old
Yeah.
kids who don't even know who they are themselves yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you're asking them to be these Christian role models
Yeah.
for these other kids who are like 5 years younger than them. And like, you know, like they don't even know what they're doing. Like, we didn't know what we were doing. There was so much of life that we haven't lived or experienced at that point that we had no idea what it meant to be a Christian. You know, like we knew what it was like to grow up in the Christian bubble we grew up in Clinton, Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
what life was like there. But we had no idea what it meant to be a Christian outside of that, out in the real world, when all of a sudden most of the people you're surrounded with aren't Christians.
Yeah.
And some people are even hostile toward your faith, you know? And we had no idea how to navigate that and how to deal with that. And so, so to me, reflecting back, like, it's insane that we place that pressure on these 19 and 20-year-old kids. And I say that as someone who did it myself when I was, 16, 17 and watching these bands grow up. And, anytime I saw someone who was in a Christian band that I really liked, smoking a cigarette, like the judgment I placed on that person, like, man, that was so wrong of me, but it was also like completely normal thing for me and my friends to do, and so I don't know, it's a weird thing, and it's bizarre, and I feel, I don't know, like, I think we did what we could with what we had, and maybe we did good, maybe we didn't. I don't know. But I don't know that we could have done better than what we did. There was we were on tour. Most of the tours we did were not Christian tours.
Mm-hmm.
We toured with a lot of bands who weren't Christian bands. But we did find ourselves one time on a tour with a band called Family Force 5.
Mm-hmm. And
who were, very outspokenly Christian.
Yeah.
And it's fine. If that's what you do, that's what you do. Great. But we played a show once on that tour in Eugene, Oregon, and
mm-hmm.
it was at a church. And I remember someone came and got me because they were like, hey, we had a merch guy / tour manager at the time, a guy
mm-hmm.
named Carter. And he's actually an Orthodox priest now. It's really cool. Someone came to me and they're like, hey, Carter's having some trouble at the merch table with some guy. And so I was like, well, I'll go see what's up. And by the time I got to the merch table, the guy had just left, but I was like, what's going on? And Carter was like, this guy's pissed at me. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, he's like, he saw y'all set and he liked y'all and he wanted to buy a CD, but he wanted to read the lyrics first. And he's like, we don't have any like open CDs. So I just told him, I was like, look, you can buy a CD, they're $10 and then you can read the lyrics all you want, and the guy was like, I want to read the lyrics first. And So Carter was just like, oh, well, I'm not going to open up a CD for you to read the lyrics and then maybe not buy it, you know?
Yeah.
Carter was being a good merchant. But the guy got mad at him and stormed off. So like, but Carter like pointed him out to me. And so I went to talk to the guy and, you know, I was like, hey man, I hear you like, you had an issue with our merch guy. And the guy just kind of like went in on me about like, you know, like us like abusing our platform and like us not preaching Christ enough and stuff like that. And I just had to stop him. I was like, look, man, like, I'm sorry you feel that way. I was like, but you have no idea who we are. Like, you saw us play 30-minute set on stage. That's all you know of us. Like, you know, like, and I was like, look, like, we don't do Christian tours a lot. We tour with a lot of bands who aren't Christian bands. And if we see it as a ministry, our ministry is to those bands that we tour with.
Yeah.
That don't know Christ. Like, because it's, you know, just our ministry can't be to the kids at the shows because we don't see them. Like, they'll watch us play. Maybe we'll get to talk with them for 2 minutes at a merch table afterwards. But then after that, we leave. And they're out of their lives. And, like, that's not ministry. Like, you can't do ministry to someone that way. But these bands that we tour with, we see them every day.
Yeah. For
10 weeks. You know, like, we get to know them. We get to have conversations with them. Like, we talk about real stuff. And so, like, if we have a ministry, it's to those people. It's not to these kids at the shows. Like, you know, and I'm like, I'm sorry if that doesn't meet your expectations, but, you know. And he actually ended up being cool and understanding. But, like, again, it was just one of those weird, like, pressure expectation things we had that we didn't necessarily sign up for. You know, we were just kids who like to play music, and that's what we signed up for, you know. Like, we were Christians and still are, and you know, weren't ashamed of it or anything like that. But it was just weird to be, and is weird that we still thrust people into that sort of position.
Yeah.
And put this pressure on them to be these role models when they don't even know who they are yet.
And I know even now, sometimes as a fan, if someone comes out with something and I don't hear like God in the first couple of lyrics, a lot of times I have this pressure to Google and be like, well, I wonder if they're still Christian. And I'm like, that's wrong. Like, just because someone's not putting like God in every song doesn't mean that they hate, you know, like, or they've turned their back or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think you're right. I look at bands like you and I sit there and I look at, you know, because I used to get upset when I didn't see a band go up and share their testimony or whatever. But I'm like, number one, if you're playing like, you know, in a local tavern or something, chances are someone's out there is not going to sit there and be like, man, I heard that guy sing a couple of songs. I'm going to go trust God now. And even if he does, it's not going to be as strong. And then you hear these stories about Christian bands. And I know Isaac Dietz, who did a bunch of video stuff for Family Force 5 and all, he's just talked a lot about how it's not a healthy environment. And he said that he's been in places where you'll have a Christian band sit there and say, hey, you want to see how you sell more, you know, albums tonight? And then they would go right out there and say, tonight, this isn't about us. It's about Jesus. And I'm like, you know, I would rather have a band like what y'all are doing, where it's like, well, your ministry or witnesses in how you're conducting business, the quality in the music, versus the band that's just sitting there like to my face talking about how much they love Christ, but then, you know, in the back are just treating, you know, all the background people like garbage or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, I don't recall us, I'm not going to say ever, but we never in the middle of our set gave a testimony, or like, you know, we never did that. I'm not going to say we never spoke about Jesus, but if we did, it was very quick. Um, but again, to me, like my ministry was, there was this band we toured with this one time, um, that they weren't a Christian band. No one in the band was Christian, but we spent 10 weeks on the road with them and we became close with them. We became good friends with them. And, a week before the tour was over with, me and their bass player were walking down the street and, he has this dream. He tells me about this dream he had.
Mm-hmm.
And the dream involved like him, and it involved God and all this, and it was all this stuff. And like, he's like, what do you think? He's like, I know you guys are Christians. Like, what do you think that means? And like, I got to be like, look, man, I'm going to be honest. Like, I feel like that's the Holy Spirit speaking to you. And like, and I got to have this like great conversation with him. And talk to him about Jesus. And, and then like, that guy and I, we still kind of kept in contact over the years. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to him maybe a year ago for the first time in a couple of years. But like, one of the first things he said to me is like, man, I still remember that conversation you and I had that one night. And he's like, and I still think about it all the time. And like, and like, so to me, like, that's way more important.
Yeah.
Than us standing on stage and going, God loves you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so yeah, like I was saying, like, that's what I saw as our ministry. Like,
mm-hmm.
these people that we're living our lives with and that we're spending time with, like, our goal is to be Christ to them because they don't know Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so it's a thing where like, I don't have to preach at them.
Yeah.
I just have to spend time with them, and I have to have conversations with them. I have to let them know that I love them. And then eventually, like, they're going to know that I love them. They're going to know that I don't judge them, and they're going to open up, and like, and then we can have a conversation about Christ. Like,
mm-hmm.
And so that's how I always saw our job as Christians in a band.
Yeah.
And that's no different from how I live my life today. Like,
mm-hmm.
I think that's the job of Christians everywhere, is to live your life in such a way that, that you just exude the love of Christ by how you treat people and, and just how you live. Yeah. Like, and so I don't know, actions speak louder than words, I guess. So.
I agree. So, you're on Tooth and Nail. You end up releasing 2 awesome albums, Popularity and Cruel to Be Young. And then all of a sudden just seems like everything like just disappears. And so fans like me for years have just scoured all of these, chat rooms and random websites trying to figure out what was the reason that the either band came to an end or y'all decided to take a DC Talk type hiatus.
Yeah, man, it was a lot. Like, our sort of breakup was kind of a year in the making. So we had, I'll say this, at the beginning of our, like, the Tooth and Nail portion of our band, several, like, probably 3 or 4 months before we went to record Popularity, we picked up a keyboardist by the name of Tim Jordan, who is from Arkansas. uh, he was he was like he was a little bit older than us. He'd already spent significant time on the road touring, and he'd been in bands. And at the time, he had just finished touring with All American Rejects.
Mm-hmm.
He was their like auxiliary guy for a while, and him and the drummer for Acidy's Burn, Aaron Lunsford, were best friends.
Mm-hmm.
So Tim was this super talented dude that played keys and guitar and was just and so Tim knew his time with the All American Rejects was coming to an end. And so he was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And Aaron sent him our 4-song demo and he was like, you need to be in this band. He's like, because they have a bunch of synth stuff all over this.
Yeah.
And they don't have anybody playing keys, anything like that. And so Tim just called Robert. We didn't know who he was. I think Robert had met him one time before, but like we didn't really know who he was. But he just called Robert and was like, "Hey, I'm Tim. I'm gonna be in your band." and we're like, "Really? Are you? You know?" And so we're like, "All right, well, come down to Clinton and practice with us and see how it goes." And so he came down to Clinton. And within like first 5 minutes of rehearsing with him, we're like, we got to get this guy in our band. So he joined our band. A week later, we moved with him to Arkansas after knowing him for a week. And that's where we wrote Popularity. And then we became really close with Tim in that time. And, we lived at his lake house, and he just became like a brother to us. He fit right in, like he fit perfect with our band, and he made us so much better than we were. And then about 2 weeks before we were set to go record Popularity, Tim ended up committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And it crushed us. And it was this thing that like we didn't even know if we were going to continue after that. Like we didn't know if Popularity was going to get recorded because we didn't even know if we were going to be a band anymore. But we talked with Tim's dad, and Tim's dad was the one that encouraged us. He was like, keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Like Tim wouldn't want you to quit. And so we did. And we almost didn't skip a beat. Like we played our first show without Tim a week after his funeral. And then like a week after that, we started recording the record in Nashville. But because we didn't miss a beat and we didn't stop, we didn't really take time to grieve Tim's death. And we didn't really take time to deal with that individually or as a band. We just kind of moved on, and I think that was eventually that caught up with us. And I think it really caught up with Robert, our singer, because he was probably the closest with Tim out of everybody. And and so you fast forward a couple of years, we recorded Popularity. We just spent a year and a half almost nonstop touring Popularity. As soon as we got off the road, we immediately started writing for Cruel to Be Young. And I think it was during that time that I think the writing process of Cruel to Be Young became, and again, this may be me speaking for Robert, and I don't want to do that, but this is me kind of speculating at how things went. The writing process for Cruel to Be Young was different, but in a lot of ways was incredibly similar to the writing process for Popularity. And so experiencing that again brings back all of these memories of the last time we wrote a record. And you start thinking a lot about Tim. And I think during that writing process, it hit Robert really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved on. At that point we had a new keyboardist, a guy named Tyler, who was great, unbelievable, probably the most talented dude I've ever met, and one of the best guys I've ever met. We had a new drummer, and like as a band, I think we were sounding the best we'd ever sounded. But like, and so that made that writing process fun. But there was also this weird sort of void of last time we did this, Tim was here, and so I think during that time, Robert started to struggle with that, and with, I think, just some mental stuff. And then January of 2008, we go to Seattle to record Cruel to Be Young. During that recording process, Robert and Kyle kind of have a falling out. They have a big fight one night. And basically it boiled down to them deciding that, that they're fine playing in a band together. But, but outside of that, they're probably not really going to be friends anymore. And so that was hard.
And I think, like you said too, you're dealing with people that are trying to grow into individuals and learn who they are and what they stand for, and you don't have time, because every night you're constantly in a bus with the same people, for months at a time, and you're standing up in front of hundreds of people trying to watch you, and then trying to figure out, like, well, are you Christian? Are you not? And I feel like with a lot of bands, that's what happens, is it's almost inevitable that you're going to have that situation occur.
Yeah. It's this weird thing where, like, we look up and we're in our mid-20s now, and we're not the same people that we were when we were 18 and 19 and we were starting this band. For better or for worse, I'm like, it's not that we're worse people.
Yeah.
We're just different people than we were then. We've discovered more about ourselves. We've discovered more who we are. And I think at that moment, Robert and Kyle realized that they were just on two different paths. When we were teenagers, it felt like we were all on the same path, and but now all of a sudden we're not.
Yeah.
And, and so that became this tension in the band. And it became difficult for me, one, because I'm like a peacemaker. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but I'm a textbook 9. And my goal in life is for everyone to be happy and everybody to be harmonious. And Kyle is one of my best friends, and Robert is one of my best friends. And it creates a lot of anxiety for me when my two best friends aren't getting along, and I can't seem to do anything to bring them back together. Like, it seems like there's irreconcilable differences between them.
And like I said, you're stuck with that person too, so you don't get that time to go and go home and cool down, because you're constantly 10 feet around this guy. Just
the furthest I can get away from you is get in the back of the van. And that's exactly, that's what, 12 feet away, like like it's, and so it became that became this tension that we were living with. So all of a sudden, Robert's now internally and kind of mentally dealing with Tim's death, or not really, but it's just kind of rehashing itself and not a good way for him. On top of that, Robert and Kyle's relationship is falling apart. And then we finish Cruel to Be Young, and we start letting people listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
Our people, our management and the label and stuff. And no one likes it. Our managers don't like it. Tooth and Nail does not like it.
Mm-hmm.
We loved it.
Yeah.
And Aaron Sprinkle, the guy that produced it, loved it. But outside of the 6 of us, no one seemed to be stoked about it.
Did they change it, or what was released? Is that what y'all?
Yeah. I mean, Tooth and Nail gave us 1,000% creative freedom with it. But then they also reserved the right to go, well, if we don't think it's a good record, then we're just not going to put a bunch of money into promoting it.
Yeah.
And, we don't have anything to do there. We go, okay, that's for us,
That's what's crazy too, because I guess maybe if you're living within it and you're a fan, you're kind of like, you get it and you think, oh, this is weird. But I know like years out, to me, it's weird because it's almost like 2 different bands. But
sure.
At the same time, the things shine through. And that's what, like I was saying, I'm a huge fan of Me Without You, huge fan of House of Heroes. And that's one thing I love is that each album, you still have the heart, but it's different, what they're singing about or how it sounds and all.
Yeah. You go and listen to It's All Crazy, It's All False by Me Without You, and it couldn't be a more different record than A to B.
Yeah.
But it's still undeniably Me Without You, and for us, it was, I mean, in a sense, you're right. Like, it was 2 different bands. Like, we had a different drummer, and we had Tyler in the mix now on keys. Alex and Tyler were very different people and very different musicians from Tim and Mick, who were the drums and keys on the first record. And it showed, like, in that, and they had a lot of input in the writing, at least the musical side of things. And so, and not to mention, we were just in different places musically as well. Time we wrote Cruel to Be Young. When we wrote Popularity, our mindset was, we want to write 11 radio singles. And we had, all we listened to that whole writing process was like Gwen Stefani, and like the most poppiest stuff you could possibly listen to. Like, that's what we listened to while we were in the midst of writing Popularity. And then when we were writing Cruel to Be Young, we were all obsessed with Weezer and obsessed with the Beatles and Tom Petty. And that's just where we were as people. And so, like, we just, for both records, we just wrote what came out of us. Like, we knew we didn't want to make Popularity Part 2.
Yeah.
That's the last thing you wanted to do. But we also weren't really trying to not make Popularity Part 2. Like, we were just writing what came out of us. And it was different. And we recognized that. I remember us being kind of sad one night at the studio where we were writing Cruel to Be Young, because we'd written probably like 3 songs. I think we'd written Wide Awake, Holding On to You, and what's it called? I don't know. We had different titles when we were writing versus what the title on the record ended up being, and I can't ever remember what the title on the record ends up. My writing. I think it's called Valentine. We'd written those 3, and we we were kind of like, man, these songs don't rock at all. But then like we went back and listened to like the demos of them, and we're like, actually, no, these songs do rock. Like,
Yeah.
they rock pretty good. And but yeah, like we recognized that it was very different. You know, I think there were a ton of moments during writing Cruel to Be Young where we were like, man, our fans are gonna hate this. You know, like and again, it wasn't intentional. It's just what we were writing, and we liked it, you know, even though it was different, we still liked it. And so, but anyways, yeah, but Tooth and Nail didn't like it. Our management didn't like it. And so we start touring again. And we're touring on the record. Well, the record's not out yet. We're touring around. We're playing a couple new songs in our set and stuff. And, you know, it's going well. We're having a good time. And again, I feel like it's the best we've ever sounded as a band live. And then the record comes out to no fanfare. Tooth and Nail did very little to promote it. I can't tell you, like, I can't even tell you how many people I've talked to about our band that don't even know that we made a second record. Like, my current girlfriend, when we first started dating, and she had like it came out that like I was in Jonzetta. She's from Jackson, and she was like, "Oh, I remember y'all." She's like, "I had y'all's record," and I was like, "You know, I had 2 records, right?" She's like, "No, I didn't." Just, you know, like, there's a lot of people that didn't even know Cruel to Be Young existed, which is sad to me because I think it's a good record.
Yeah,
I'm proud of it. But yeah, it is different. So anyways, we're touring. The record comes out. Tooth and Nail does as little as they legally can to promote it. No one's stoked on it. And so we get to this point where we just kind of feel like we're just spinning our tires in the mud. Like, we're out here on the road. We're working our butts off. And no one that's supposed to be working for us is working for us because they don't believe in the record. And so then it just gets to this point where, what are we doing? You know? And by this point, Robert and Kyle's relationship had completely broken down. And so I remember Jacksonville, Florida. It was in October of 2008. It was about a month after the record came out. And it was probably an hour or two before our show. And Kyle pulled me aside and said, "Hey, this is going to be my last tour." And I tried to talk him out of it. I mean, I got it. Like, he had also just gotten married 2 months before that. And so, like, he didn't love the idea of spending so much time away from his new wife, stuff like that. Like, that was part of it. But then the other part of it was like, he and Robert just weren't speaking. They couldn't stand to be around each other, you know? And I understood why he was leaving. But at the same time, Kyle was my best friend, and I didn't want him to leave. And I didn't know if I could do it without Kyle. Without him being there to support me, and me being there to support him, vice versa. But I remember him telling me that, and then I remember him saying, when are you going to tell the other guys? And he said, probably at the end of this tour, which we still had like 2 or 3 weeks left on the tour.
Yeah.
And I was like, no way. I was like, I'm not carrying this around with me for 3 weeks. Like you need to tell him now. Like, not now, but tonight, you know?
Yeah.
And so we played our show, And that was the worst. Like, I don't know, like it was so hard, like playing that show and trying to look like we're having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, I know everything's not okay, you know? And so after the show that night, we have a band meeting in the parking lot of some person's apartment that we were staying at.
Mm-hmm.
And Kyle tells everybody that he's quitting. And then I tell everybody, I don't know where I'm at, but I'm having a hard time seeing myself do this without Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
And then Robert speaks up, and Robert says that he feels like he's going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And he, at the very least, needs to take some time off when we get done with this tour. And so we all kind of speak and we all kind of share our piece. And we talk and then we kind of realize that, like, if we all want to be friends 10 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
we probably need to stop doing this. And so that's where we landed. We said, all right, this is our last tour. And the rest of that tour was so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it was because, like, this weight and this pressure that we'd all been carrying around with us was lifted now. Like, everything was out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it, and man, we had a blast those last couple of weeks. Like, it was sad to know that it was coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
It was also a lot of fun. And yeah, and then I think we just didn't say anything. I think we told our management that we're going to take some time off.
Mm-hmm.
And like how long, and we were like, we don't know. And then I think that's all that was said. Like, we told our management that. I'm assuming they told the label.
Mm-hmm.
And we never put anything out on the internet about it. Like, I mean, like you said, we just kind of disappeared. And I don't know. I feel like sometimes I feel bad about that, and sometimes I'm like, no, that was a very Jonzetta thing. That was a very Jonzetta way to do it.
Yeah, I was about to say, I feel like everyone in Mississippi was like, no, they do this all the time. They'll be right back next week. And then people just...
Someone calling us, ask us to play a show.
Yeah, like I said, I remember getting into y'all for, like, I guess it would have been like right after all this happened. So I was at the point where I was like, man, I love this band. Can't wait to go pick me up a Jonzetta shirt. They're nowhere. So now it's just going on eBay trying to figure out, like, maybe I can steal some merch off of there or something. But so for you, after Jonzetta, what did life look like for you? And do you see, like, in the future there being possibility of a, live show or just a little, we see all these bands right now doing stuff with, COVID, where they're getting together and doing these little Zoom concerts or whatever. I guess
Sure.
That kind of two-part question.
Yeah. So for me, I don't know. I was kind of at a loss. Being in a band and being in a touring band was kind of all I ever wanted to do. I remember when we first signed our record deal and Kyle and I were talking about it, and Kyle's mindset was like, yeah, we'll do this for probably 5 or so years, and then we'll reevaluate and, probably move on with our lives. And I was like, no. I was like, I'm doing this till I'm dead. Like, that's my plan, And so when we broke up, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't feel like I had the time. I didn't feel like I had the energy to, like, start a new band and try to start it over again. And I didn't feel like there was any other group of dudes that I wanted to join up with and do it with other than the guys in Jonzetta, I dropped out of college. I didn't really know what to do. And so about a month after we got home from that last tour, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is from Mississippi who had moved up to Memphis, and she was working at a church up there. And I'd always kind of led worship and stuff like that. And so she just was like, hey, would you be interested in moving up here to Memphis and leading worship at our church? And so I said yes. And then in February of 2009, I moved to Memphis and started working at that church there. While I was there, I was able to go and finish my undergrad degree, and then I ended up going to seminary and have a master's in theology now.
Wow.
And I still lead worship at a church. I just moved to Starkville, Mississippi 2 days ago. Started a new job at a church here. And yeah, it's great. I love leading worship. It's a lot different. It's not, I don't feel like the creative side of me is necessarily fulfilled in it. I basically feel like I'm in a glorified cover band, which is fine. Like, I don't mind it. But yeah, that's pretty much been my life since the band quit. I am in a new band that we started probably a year ago that Robert's in as well.
Okay.
Robert's just playing guitar in it. I'm playing guitar and I'm singing. My friend Drew from the band Color Revolt is playing bass. And then just a friend of ours from Memphis is playing drums, and another friend of ours from Jackson is playing guitar as well. But it's a new band. We're called Don Quixote's Horse. You know, you can check that out on the internet somehow. I don't know. I'm so bad at social media. I'm not on any. I don't really know how to use it. But yeah, we're just like a rock band. We just put out an EP.
Okay.
4 months ago, just 3 songs, and we're working on our second EP right now. And it's a lot of fun. It's fun to play music like that again.
Yeah.
In that setting again. I think the songs are good. I don't think they're as good as Jonzetta songs because I'm not as good of a songwriter as Robert is. But they're a lot of fun, and yeah, and it's fun to play music with dudes again, and with Robert too. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. As far as a Jonzetta show goes, I don't know. So we did a reunion show about a year after we broke up in Jackson. And it was a lot of fun. That was in November of 2009. It was a lot of fun, and it felt like a really nice bow to put on. And then about a year and a half after that, we did another reunion show as like a fundraiser thing in Jackson. That was in 2011, and that was not fun. We did not. I can't speak for everybody. I personally did not have a good time. It was stressful, and it just seemed like we weren't all on the same page.
Yeah.
And so that's the last time we've all played together in 2011. So was that 9 years ago? But I mean, I still talk to all the guys. Still good friends with all the guys, and talk to all of them on a fairly regularly basis. And I think we're all in a place where, like, I think we would definitely entertain the idea of playing together again. I think we would love to. We're all so spread out now. Kyle lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. I now live in Starkville, Mississippi. Robert and Tyler still live in Jackson, Mississippi. Alex, our drummer, he lives in LA now. So we're all so spread out, and we're all pretty busy. You know, it would take a lot of logistics for us to be able to get together and do it, and to do it in the way we wanted to. Like, we would want it to be good. And so I don't know, man. I think the desire to do it again would be there for everybody. I just don't know if it would happen. I don't know.
Yeah, as a fan, you always want that stuff to happen, but then you have this fear that, well, what if it's not as good as it was? Or like even for me, like I was a huge DC Talk fan, and
Hmm.
I know when they got together and released the I think it's like Love Feels Like on Toby's last record, I was like, man, this sounds cool. Like 2016 DC Talk is cool. All these people online ripped it, and they were like, this wasn't '90s. And that's what I always have this fear is, like when I look at like a Jonzetta, I'm like, man, selfishly, I want to hear like, an EP or whatever, but I'm like, I don't really want to go online and just see people talking about like, well, this wasn't 2009 Jonzetta or, whatever. I'm like, because then you just start becoming a keyboard warrior, being like, you don't understand music.
Well, yeah, it's just like, man, like, like when we wrote Popularity, I was like, what, 21, 22 years old?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm 36, almost 37. Like I'm a different musician than I was then. I definitely don't feel like I have as much to prove as I felt like then.
I feel like Hot Machete is a weirder song, like the older you get to like if you made that music video, or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Like, oh man, I feel so weird to make that music video today. Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. Like, if we got together and wrote new songs, like, I have high hopes for them.
Hmm.
I still think Robert's an unbelievable songwriter. Occasionally he'll play some songs for me that he's written
Hmm.
recently. They're out of this world good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would love to get together with the dudes and like try and flesh out some of those ideas. And I just feel like it would be really hard to do it without, well, one, it'd be hard to find the time to do it.
Yeah.
But two, it also like, I feel like it'd be hard to do it without the pressure
Hmm.
of, trying to make it really good or something that people would like. I don't know. I don't know though. We're pretty good at not putting pressure on ourselves, like in just doing what comes natural. Um, yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I think we would all love to do it,
Hmm.
but I just don't know if it would happen.
Yeah, I feel like the good way to wrap that up is that the answer I kind of gathered was, hey, it might happen, it probably won't, it might be good, it might be the worst thing ever. So it's
Yeah,
just
that's it.
a toss
Yeah,
up.
like, I'm definitely not saying it would never happen.
Hmm.
Probably won't. Like, not out of a lack of desire,
Yeah.
just a lack of other things.
I
So
think what gave me hope was a couple years ago when Goatee Records did their like 20th anniversary one, they had
yeah,
people come back and cover other people's. And I'm like, man, Tooth and Nail had so many bands and so many songs. And I'm like, you could just have like
yeah,
5 compilations with just bands coming back. So it gave me that hope that you'd see people disappear because I think the 2 most obscure bands when I bring them up is you, and then I think y'all were there, or this might have been like right, maybe the same time, but Neon Horse,
yeah.
like when they got together and put stuff, like those are the 2 bands that whenever someone says like, yeah, I'm a pretty big like Christian music rock fan, I'm always like, well, do you know Jonzetta? Do you know Neon Horse? So
Yeah. Neon Horse is that's a pretty obscure uh to the nail band for sure. Yeah, they were. I feel like they kind of came out around the same time as we did too, maybe a little before. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's weird to even run into someone that knows who we were.
mhm.
Like, it's happened a handful of times, and it always surprises me, um, especially when it's someone outside of the Jackson, Mississippi area,
Mhm.
because we did pretty well there. But yeah, like getting the message from you was a pretty. It was like a weird thing. It was cool, but it was just weird, you know.
Yeah, I know on like because I've on Facebook there was like a ton of like Robert Chisholms. I guess that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah, yeah,
But there's
just
a ton, and I'm like, man, I don't feel like messaging strangers. But then I stumbled up. I was like, man, I think this guy is the same guy. And I like, went up to my wife and I was like, do you think this guy is the same guy if you just change the hair a little bit? And I was like, well, the worst they can do is just say, we don't know who Jonzetta is. I was like, it's the worst, but I really enjoy getting to chat with you. I feel like it was cool getting, not only to interview um, a band that was as good as y'all, but also just from the perspective of a fan, getting to sit down and, talk to someone who produced music that I loved back then. But even now, like I love sitting down and, like I said, I feel like if I want to get pumped up, I turn on Popularity. If I want to get something to kind of just get like, me thinking or working through stuff, I turn on Cruel to Be Young. And, it's still to this day, the music's still something that I love. And, it ranks up there with, some of my favorite albums of all time.
man, I appreciate that. I really do. Because, yeah, I mean, it's both of those records are things I'm proud of and things we're proud of. But um, it's always, it doesn't really register me when
Mm-hmm.
other people enjoy it, you know? But I'm glad you do. I really am. And I thank you for that. Um, I'm glad that, I could be a part of creating something that brings a complete stranger joy. So yeah, I appreciate that very much. Thank you.